So, Josh, whenever we get together, we talk about a myriad of topics, whether it's politics, religion, science, culture, sports, whatever. I thought it would be interesting, thus the title of the show, It Might Be Interesting, if in addition to talking about those things, we did a deeper dive and found, scholarly journals and media reports to help kind of strengthen our discussion. So I thought that's where we would start with.
Yeah, I absolutely love the idea. I can't tell you how excited I am to embark on this journey with you. And I feel like with this first episode, since I know you did a ton of research and I feel bad with my work schedule and travel restrictions and everything and requirements, I wasn't able to do as much research. So since we do want to be a little more fact-driven and research-driven, I want to see if it's all right with you if I try on my hat as an interviewer, and
Absolutely.
I kind of take on the role of interviewing you about this so we can kind of present this in the most research-based way for everyone.
I think that might be interesting.
Sounds great to me.
Let's do it.
You're listening to It Might Be Interesting. These are your hosts, Josh Levy
And John Walsh.
There are petabytes of data on any subject you want out there.
And sometimes you just need somebody who can extrapolate it in a way that might be interesting.
So today, the subject I will be interviewing John about and discussing is the state of religion in America.
Right.
And a topic that we have had as many conversations about over the years, and something that I do know is something pretty near and dear from his own personal experience growing up, your personal experience. So, but on that note, I will hand it to you and just ask you first if you can kind of give us an idea, like based on your background, like what about this issue is made it the first one you wanted to talk about.
So what's interesting about religion declining in America is it's declining in the Western world, and America is a kind of a controlled study of it because so many institutions do surveys and so forth. So when you grow up in a religious setting and you leave it, a lot of times you feel somewhat isolated, like you're on the out group. But that number of people on the out group is now growing to a point where it may topple the number of people that are religious. So I find that fascinating, and I wanted to dig deeper into it and look at the statistics behind it.
Nice. And and you do have some personal history. You're pretty familiar with, like, we'll be talking a lot, kind of focusing mostly on America. On America, and a lot of you who might be listening know of the communities that are deeply religious, close communities, family brought up very religious. So if you don't mind talking, you know firsthand about what I'm talking about, don't you, John?
I do. So I grew up in an evangelical Christian home, and that's kind of where I have a frame of reference on. And that is the group that fascinates me as the controlled study. Having left that behind, I now look back on it and watch the trends of it within American society, and I know based on that I'm not the only one that's left it. I think it's going to be somewhat specific towards one specific group within the religious community that I did the study on, and that's where the most compelling information is, because they're a little more fundamentalist in their approach, and their approach is more non-compromising, and that has now been injected into a political system which requires compromise. So it is having an effect on a national level in a way that is quantifiable and able to be studied and researched.
So just for clarification, when we're going to be talking about religion and everything, and especially when you talk about, Christian America or anything like that, just for anyone listening, that you are referring mostly, talking about like an evangelical sect. You're not just broad stroke,
Yeah, I'm not talking white mainline Protestants or black evangelicals or or whatever. I'm talking in the most narrowest sense of the definition of the word Christian. If I say Christian, I'm talking from my experience, what was defined to me growing up as Christian, which was only evangelical. So you'll have to forgive me if I say Christian throughout this, and somebody hears this and goes, "Well, I'm a Christian, and I don't believe that." I'm speaking about the evangelical group within Christianity.
So for some of us who haven't grown up in that type of household, like I grew up in a religious household, but very different. And could you give us like maybe a snapshot of like some of the things that are said, spoken, like beliefs, whether it is, no sex before marriage, or, you'll go to hell if you sleep in the same bed as someone of the same gender or whatever. Give us an idea, paint that picture of like what that type of community or household or belief.
I think to answer that question, what we have to do first is define fundamentalism. Mm-hmm. Fundamentalism in any religion is the idea that the canon or the religious script is the word of God, and it is the foundation of all their beliefs. And what makes them fundamental is that those specific writings are a fundamental truth of the universe, and therefore they're not up for debate, and they're not up for questioning. I heard one mathematician once say, "I would rather have questions I can't answer than answers I can't question." Right? And that's what fundamentalism is. Don't question it. Right? So whatever the belief is, whether it's on gay rights or on transgender rights or on women's rights or minority rights or whatever, the first category or first thing that they go to look for guidance in those areas is the Bible. So you'll hear them say, the Bible's the only book I need. That's the Word of God is the only thing people need. So the way I kind of interpret it is, and it lies into one of the reasons religion is on the decline, is if you had an alien land here from outer space, and they said, "We want to know everything about life on this planet. We come in peace, but we want to know about life on this planet." A fundamentalist evangelical may go, "Here's the Word of God. Here's the Bible. That's all you'll ever need to know." Mm-hmm. Whereas anyone else would go, "Here's Google."
Right.
Google it, right? And you'll find out.
So it seems like there's frequent rhetoric from this group of evangelicals and the right where they say that the reason there is a decline, because they notice a decline in numbers too, the reason for it is almost exclusively because they're under attack.
When we talk about persecution, I mean, you are from a Jewish background, and persecution in that background means something a lot different than, say, the Supreme Court overturned a decision on gay marriage, and now we're forced to live in a society that accepts this. The reason they feel they're under attack is because when you hold a religious belief, like let's say for gay marriage, that you see society has moved around, that's a traditional belief for you, and it's what draws you to the church and draws you to, the sense of community. And if that is being overruled by society, then the feeling is, I'm the victim from this. My values are under attack. My way of life is under attack. And the reality is, it just isn't. Persecution, when I think of persecution, I think of people being killed or even being discriminated against, losing their jobs, having family members killed or hunted, You don't have to look very far for what persecution really looks like. Mm-hmm. But to say, hey, I got disagreed with, or I had a court ruling go against a cultural ideal, and therefore it affects me, that to me is not persecution. That is being disagreed with. but it feels like persecution. And the reason it feels like persecution is because the battle for them is not a legal one. It is a spiritual one. And if they're being overruled in the physical, then that overruling isn't based on law. It's based on a spiritual attack upon Christianity. So to further quantify that, what I want to do is kind of dig into the numbers. Why are the numbers going down? How are they going down? And where do we see evidence of it? Mm-hmm. So let's take a look. So one of the most striking things, if you look at a survey done by the PRRI, which is the Public Religious Research Institute, they do all sorts of surveys on religion, and they're not like, oh, we called 100 people, right? We conducted surveys with 3,000 people over 10 years. So 3,000 people a year, that's 30,000 people they've talked to. Mm-hmm. And they compile all that data over 10 years and then present you with the outcomes of it. Mm-hmm. And what they're finding is so fascinating to me. So if you look at it on a generational level, right? My father's generation, 65 and over, about 88% claim one religion or another. And 12% are what they call nuns, meaning not like Catholic nuns, but you're marking none on the sheet when it says religion, right? 12% of that generation identifies as non-religious or non-affiliated. And within that non-affiliated, you have agnostic, you have atheist, and you just have, the people on Tinder that say spiritual but not religious, right? But of that 88%, 26% identify as white evangelical. So the highest portion of white evangelical is in the age group of 65 and older. And as you look generationally, that number goes down. So 18 to 29, 8% say they're white evangelical. So a really significant drop between the two generations. But what's staggering is on the back end of that, right? The nuns, the non-religious, 38%, opposed to 12% of the 65 and over. So you're seeing the gap in religion grow based on generation more than anything. And new studies have come out that show Generation Z is even more non-religious than the millennial generation. There's a religious study out done by a religious organization called the Barna Group. They're a Christian polling organization. And they did a study on Generation Z. And they found that within Generation Z, they are equally, if not more, non-religious than the millennial generation. And the millennial generation claims to be atheist within that non-religious group by about 7%. And Generation Z has nearly doubled that. So, and they claim to be atheist, right? So 13% of Generation Z are not only saying that they're not religious, they're saying we're atheist. Mm-hmm. So no religion, no desire for religion whatsoever. Right. So not only is unaffiliated with any religion growing, so is atheism within that unaffiliated. Like, I have no interest in it whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And that's a really interesting statistic. And within, various religious organizations, that's a terrifying statistic.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, that sounded like, especially Generation Z, that is the first time, gathering this polling data, first generation where people who declare themselves as atheists actually is a higher percentage than people who declare themselves explicitly as evangelical. Because didn't you say 8% before with millennial, like 8% evangelical, 7% were atheist. So it was close, and then all of a sudden you get to Generation Z. I don't know how many, what percentage of Generation Z considered themselves to be evangelical, but it did seem, if it followed that trend, that it would be the first generation where atheists really outnumbered, by possibly 2 to 1.
Yeah, and it doesn't break down how many claim to be evangelical. It's really just looking at the none category, this specific survey.
Okay.
But we can assume that their numbers are dwindling at the same rate as the millennial generation, as opposed to the baby boomer or the silent generation.
How can we, or what can you speak to in terms of the political impact, a larger impact, community impact on others, and how it has influenced politics and influenced society as a whole more?
So if we're looking at it on a political scale, there's a trend that's going on that kind of mirrors the trend within the generational divide as well. And this PRRI survey that we've been talking about also quantifies that data as well. And one of the things they point out is that in 2006, they did a survey on, religious politicos, right? People that claim a religion or just, within this political party, what do they identify as? What do they self-identify as? So in 2006, 37% of the Republican Party identified as white evangelical, whereas only 17% of Democrats did. And now here we are 10 years later in 2016, and that evangelical number in the Republican Party has gone down slightly from 37% to 35%. And within the Democratic Party, it's been halved. So it went from 17 down to 8%. Okay, but at the same time, in 2006, within the Republican Party, 4% claimed to be non-religious, whereas 9% of the Democratic Party claimed to not be religious. Mm-hmm. Today, or 10 years after that, 11% of the Republican Party claims no affiliation to religion, and 26%, as opposed to the 9% 10 years prior, now say they're non-religious within the Democratic Party. So if you see the amount of evangelicals leaving the Democratic Party, they may be going over to the Republican Party, right? But that number is going down still from 37 to 35. So they're probably still politically active, and they're assembling in the camp that best suits their needs. Mm-hmm. But the non-religious category is growing in both. So you just see a narrowing across the board in all of these categories. And in not one of these did the number grow over the 10-year span other than in the non-religious category. So there were more Hindus 10 years ago, or claiming to be Hindu, than there is today.
Right.
So every single religious category that was surveyed within both political parties is on the decline, and the only thing rising is the non-religious.
So, I mean, how come at least maybe this is just my perspective, but it seems like if that is a pretty big jump, that's a pretty significant change, but every time there's an election and politician comes to town or they're on TV, I mean, it seems like they still pander to, and I hate saying this because I really do believe that, like, no matter who you are, I don't care if I agree with you, disagree with you, like, you should have your voice and it should be heard no louder or softer than mine. Like, I do believe that you should be represented or be heard. So I don't think politicians should, like, just brush off anyone.
Sure.
But I do feel like it's almost like as the numbers get down, the pond gets smaller, they're just like trying harder to reach that fish instead of going to the pond where there are more fish. Yeah. I mean, like, what am I possibly missing here? It feels like it's almost such a no-brainer that I'm like, I gotta be missing something.
Yeah, and it's hard to talk to why politicians are doing that. It's still a motivating factor.
Right.
There's so many cultural issues that are motivating factors to get people to the polls. And so maybe that's why they pander to it. Or maybe it's because, like within the Republican Party, a larger percentage of the people that are in there are identifying as white evangelical. So maybe that's just who they are. Mm-hmm. So maybe they're not pandering and they're just, stating, hey, I believe this one thing. It could be said either way, but what's interesting to your point is this growing demographic in both parties. Why are they not preaching to that choir?
Right.
It would be that is the change that I foresee on the horizon. Is they will start, and what's important to that group? Is it a cultural thing, or is it climate change? Is it abortion, or is it, education?
Right.
Is it healthcare? Is it all these things that the Democrats are now talking about and running on? Or is it a cultural? Because if you talk to a fundamentalist, right, and you say, what's going on in America? Like why are people leaving the church? Mm-hmm. Their number one answer is going to be the moral decline of America. Mm-hmm. That is the go-to answer for every evangelical pastor I've seen interviewed on ABC or NBC or whatever, is there is a moral decline in America. Well, that moral decline is a cultural thing. It's the cultural issues. They disagree with those cultural issues, and therefore that is causing a decline, right?
Right.
Or that's what's creating like a moral landscape that is declining. What's causing people to leave religion, in my opinion, is they have more access to more information more often. Mm-hmm. Like I was saying about the alien and having Google, having the entire world at your fingertips to get answers and find out things makes a scripture a bit underwhelming.
Right.
It doesn't add the value that they need. So to your point, I think Democrats are starting to see that trend and are moving more towards like, hey, let's put in policies that attract people. Bernie Sanders really capitalized on that. People didn't love Bernie because he was a liberal. It's because he was talking about using the government to solve problems.
Right.
Finding solutions through all of us coming together. Right.
No, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's like when I asked, I'm not saying, I want to hear a politician get up and say, I'm going to be anti-religion. It's like, no, that's not going to solve a thing.
Right.
I don't want to hear that. I don't want separation of church and state means whether you're an evangelical Christian or even if the candidate themselves is an absolute atheist, like you're not going to touch religion. You're just going to stay out of it. You're
right.
Separation of church and state. And so, and all because, when the founding fathers were creating this country, that at that time, in England, I believe it was Protestantism was declared as the official religion of the British Empire. Yeah, the Church of England. And so even if you're a Catholic, if you're a Christian but you're Catholic, you weren't, you could have been persecuted again. You didn't have the same rights, legal rights. And the founding fathers said, look, you should be able to whatever religion you want. Like,
right.
Nobody, no ruler should tell you what you should or shouldn't believe. And so, anyway, just wrapping back to, what you're saying.
But on that point, though, very quickly, if you give people the option of choosing whatever religion they want, and you give them an overload of information,
right?
Are they even going to choose a religion? You know what I mean?
Right.
If they have an entire database at their fingertips to know and understand the world, is religion really going to play into that? Are they going to seek out advice from religion? And
what seems kind of bizarre to me, and this is less of a political thing, but a phenomenon where I always believed that the prominence of religion was fulfilling a human need that a lot of people have, understandably, of what the heck happens when we're gone, you know? Yeah. Or answering a ton of questions, who are we, why are we here? Yeah, the infinite number of questions that are beyond even our realm of understanding, as well as, when people encounter tragedy in life, making sense of things, and so I always thought that was anyone who left it would almost possibly be a void, but it's almost like they don't need it. I mean, is it possible that the plethora of information, even if it's not answering all of life's questions, it's filling a void, that void, or
it might be creating a sense of community.
Right.
But I think at the end of the day, what they're looking at is, does it add value?
Right.
Is me saying I'm against gay marriage, or I'm against, secularism or evolution being taught in the schools, or I'm for abstinence-only programs, is that adding value? Does the data support that having an abstinence-only program in a public school, does that drive down teenage pregnancy? Does it drive down STDs? Does it drive down abortion? Mm-hmm. And the answer is no, it drives them up.
Right.
Because those kids aren't prepared with the information they need to protect themselves from unwanted pregnancy and STDs. So is it adding value in that dialogue, in that debate? A lot of people are looking at the statistics because it's now at their fingertips, and they're going, no, it's not adding, it's subtracting from what we need to address.
Right. No discussion about religion would be complete if I didn't ask you a question involving science.
Oh, science.
Yes, the enemy.
The dirty mistress.
That's right. So let me ask you, when it comes to this decline that we've been talking about, first I wanted to kind of talk about the decline and is science, I know of course they are at ideological odds with one another, but is it as big a boogeyman as, people who are religious seem to think it is? And in some cases, vice versa. There are people who are very scientific who think that religion is the absolute enemy of everything. But what role has science played, and has it been bigger or not as big as?
So science and religion, the question is always, are they in conflict? Mm-hmm. And by definition, they're in conflict. One is a collection of data and a forming of a belief based upon that data. And the other is a belief and then data collected to support that belief, right? So they work in opposite terms.
Right.
And nowhere is that specific mechanism more prevalent than in white evangelical Christianity. And Pew Research did a study on religion and science. And not only did you find that religion was out of step with science, but white evangelicals were further out of step in almost every category as opposed to their peers in like white mainline Protestant or black Protestant or Hindu or whatever. Out of every category. So let's just, for example, if the survey was, are red apples better than green apples, right? White evangelicals would not only say 75%, let's say, said that red apples taste better. That 75% would be higher than any other group. So in contrast, the 25% that said green apples were better within that would be the lowest percentage of any group, right? So, and that staggering effect on almost every question of the survey, I didn't do the math on it, but from what I'm looking at, I would say at least 80% of the questions, white evangelicals were further in or out of step to their counterparts. So let's take a look at some of the survey questions and where evangelicals fell on it. Percent of adults who say churches should express their views or keep out of politics. Evangelicals, 69% said that policy decisions should take into account religion. Right? You compare that to black Protestant, 66. So it's not super out of alignment. But Most of the other groups are 63, 54, 45. Catholics, 45%. It's kind of 50-50. Right. But evangelicals, 69%. Percent of adults who say humans have evolved or existed in their present form since the beginning of time. Existed in their present form, white evangelicals, 60% believe that. And no one else comes close. The next close is black Protestant at 47, so a 13-point difference, right? Everyone else is 23, 27, 21, 38. So overwhelmingly, evangelicals do not believe in evolution and believe that we were created in our present form. Percent of adults who say scientists generally agree or do not agree that humans evolved. Again, evangelicals are way out there. 49% say that scientists do not agree on that. So not only do they not believe in evolution, they believe that scientists don't agree on evolution at a rate of 49%. And again, way outside the norm for their peers, 36, 26, 31, 28. And this is white mainline Protestant, black Protestant, net Catholic, white Catholic, Hispanic Catholic, so on and so forth. So not only are they out of step on that one, 16 points ahead of their next peer group. Percent of adults who say scientists generally believe the universe was created by a single violent event. Scientists are divided on that, right? The question is, are they divided?
Gotcha.
69% of white evangelicals say they are divided on it.
That scientists are divided on the Big Bang.
Yeah. And their next closest group is 13 points down, or excuse me, 10 points down, 11 points down. At 58%, and that's black Protestant. But, 69% of them believe that scientists are arguing over the Big Bang Theory, right?
Whereas we know God made the Big Bang happen.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
What's there to argue about?
Right.
Percent of adults who say parents should be able to decide whether or not to vaccinate their children. Evangelicals say parents should decide by 39%. And the next closest is 31%, and that's black Protestant. So again, they're outside the norm on that. Whereas you take who's at the top. Hispanic Catholic, 79% say vaccinations should be required, as opposed to 39% of evangelicals that say, let's leave that to the parents to decide.
Right.
Percent of adults who think scientists generally agree or do not agree that the Earth is getting warmer due to human activity. 47% of evangelicals believe that scientists do not agree that humans are the cause of climate change. So nearly half of them believe that.
So one thing I wanted to ask is, do you believe, we've seen this in maybe not as much with religion, maybe so, but with a lot of political issues, a pendulum effect. It's almost like clockwork. We'll elect a Republican for so long, then we'll elect a Democrat, and then it's like this back and forth. And so do you think that possibly we will get a pendulum effect with this in terms of whether it be, just the membership itself? Like, as we spoke earlier, millennials get a little older, they start a family, and maybe they start feeling like, okay, we'll have that community. Or, and as well as, I think more importantly, I say more importantly because whatever you do on Sunday is your business, and but the political effect, will we see suddenly that chart change? Like
you're asking, will we see a return to religion?
Yes.
Will that pendulum swing back the other way? I tend to think not.
Okay.
And the reason why is to draw people to religion, there is a sense of community. And I think people are looking outside of that for community now. Mm-hmm. You have online communities where you find people with similar interests and so forth. One thing that I noticed personally growing up about religion was all these people in the church, I really didn't have anything in common with them. There was no interest that we shared, that, maybe a handful of them that your interests drew you together. Otherwise, you were just there to kind of validate the belief that they held already.
Right.
The problem is that form of community is dying, and the numbers show that too. So this is from an article I read by an evangelical pastor, and he quotes, and I'm just going to read straight from the article because it's so interesting. He says, of the 250,000 Protestant churches in America, 200,000 are either stagnant with no growth or declining. That's 80% of all churches in America, and maybe one that you attend if you attend at all. 4,000 churches close their doors every single year. There is less than half the number of churches today than there were only 100 years ago. 3,500 people leave the church every single day. Since 1950, there are a third fewer churches in the U.S. So is there going to be a return to it? I don't know. Do you think we're going to rent movies from Blockbuster again?
Right.
It's kind of the same effect. If you look at it as a business, right? And they're closing 4,000 stores a year, right? I mean, that's significant. And then at the same time, their major competitor has a child sex abuse scandal within their doors.
Right.
I don't see people, signing a petition or signing up to join the Catholic Church, or, now you've got the evangelical movement who overwhelmingly supports Donald Trump. And that's, to a lot of people, toxic.
Right.
Right? And they see that and go, that's not a community I want to be involved in. So will it swing back? Maybe when a lot of this stuff dies down, maybe, and they want a centralized form of community that is non-discriminatory, maybe then the church will rise back up. But I don't see it happening in today's climate.
I know plenty of people who maybe they moved, maybe they got a job somewhere else. It's not like anyone changed their mind about religion, but sure enough, before you know it, they're not going to church as much, they're not making it, and it's almost like religion slowly is less and less important in their life. Like, does religion need to somehow make some type of transformation, or is it even possible for, do you think the physical church, like you said, the store, is that just an absolute crux and critical to the survival of it?
So let's take a store, right? What could Circuit City have done to stay in business?
Right.
Right? What was really keeping them alive was adapting to a new technology, which was the internet, ordering online and picking up in the store. They invented that, and they still went under, right? So if they adapt to the changing landscape within the United States, are they going to survive? Are they going to grow in number? It's really hard to say. I don't see it really happening. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic.
Jeez.
I know.
Thanks for listening to It Might Be Interesting.
Please join us next time.